I have been trying to write out this story for a long time. The main problem is that so much has happened that it's been extremely challenging to create an overall narrative of what went down without getting totally lost in side stories. Also, I am not a writer, so doing this was not easy for me, but I need to get some of this out of my system. So, to start out, I want you to understand that I'm a gay man, and most of the people involved are LGBT. I mention this not to wave my human rights campaign logo flag in your face, but to stress how unnerving these experiences were to us. For me, growing up gay in South Carolina was difficult, to put it mildly. Even when I came out in the early 2000s, at the age of 13, this was no easy feat. I endured neglect, abuse, and betrayals that I pray no other human being has to endure. But as the cliché saying goes, what does not kill me made me stronger. Most of the people who are around at this time are very similar to me in this regard too. We're all hardened and can take care of ourselves, to put it that way. As a unit, we were even more capable too. So it's not like we were just a bunch of prissy bitches running around scared of our own shadows and bumps in the night. It takes some pretty serious crazy to freak us out. With all that being said, this story is about a house on Reservation Road. It sits on 55 acres of undeveloped woods in the Catawba Indian Reservation in the York Country area of South Carolina, roughly a 30-minute drive south of Charlotte, NC. Now, the two Carolinas are some of the oldest territories in the United States, and with that comes a lot of lore and legends and obviously ghost stories. But who out there ever actually expects to become a part of one, right? I met Mary and Kellen through a mutual friend in 2006 while I was in my early 20s. I have always felt comfortable being friends with lesbian couples, because typically we have mutual interests, and they'll protect you like a pair of rabid black bears if the need ever arises. It was not long before they took me under their wing, and soon we were spending a lot of time together. Kellen was a few years older than Mary and I, so even though they were constantly friends hanging out at their house, she always went to bed before anyone else. This gave Mary and I lots of time to spend kicking ass at Mario Kart and telling stories of our younger lives. Bonding, basically. I had been a photographer for several years, and when Mary showed an interest, I fully encouraged her. I'm no longer sure how exactly we ended up outside on the back deck, orb hunting, but we did, and that was what started it all. Alright, so let's quickly roll up our sleeves and muscle this obligatory house description out of the way so that we can finally get to the creepy stuff. The house was a single-level rectangle, simple enough. The front of the house faced the road and the rear faced into the woods. When you walk through the front door, you are immediately inside of the living room, which opens up to our left. A few steps in, you encounter to your right the hallway that leads to all 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. A couple of steps past the hallway entrance, and you find yourself facing an open space. To your left is the kitchen. Directly across from you are the set of French doors leading out into the deck, and to your right is the dining area. As I stated, I'm not sure what prompted the search for orbs on digital film, but I distinctly remember the two of us standing out on the deck after Kellen went to bed. Mary was a born trigger finger, meaning that she can take pictures more rapidly and in quicker succession than any other photographer I've ever met. This makes her absolute perfection at capturing candid moments. After a while of not getting anything, she began to sweetly call out to them in the voice that you would use for a young child or pet. She said, "Come on out. Let me take a picture of you. I know you're out there. Let us see you." The shutter clicking in rapid fire for a few minutes. She then drops the camera, activates the gallery, and we start going through the pictures. Most of them showed just the pitch-black tree line, faintly lit by the floodlight, which barely illuminated anything that far from the back of the house. Some of them had dust particles, which excited us for a moment before we realized what it was. But then, there they were, a couple of orbs. Sweet, we thought, and so became our new obsession. Spending time with our cameras outside at night, all over the yard, calling out to any and all wayward spirits to come forth, then going back inside to digest the digital film, became a nightly occurrence almost. In some of the pictures, it looks like a blizzard of all different sizes and brightness to them too. What I began to notice with time, though, was that when we would begin to call out to them to join us, and the many orbs would begin to fill the screens, something would change in the atmosphere around us. I felt like I was standing amidst the crowds of a large music or sporting event, rather than in an empty backyard with my one friend. At times, the temperature would even drop. It's so obvious now, but at the time, I had no idea what we were doing, what we were stirring up. But we soon learned that our new friends were about to become very, very familiar to us. Now, before we had begun this foray into stupidity, there were a few other odd things about this house. Mary had a spirit which attached himself to her years before she moved here, while she and some friends used a witch's circle as a game. When she told me this, not long after we met, honestly, I thought she was crazy. She had survived admirably after enduring severe traumas through her adolescence, and I rationalized that her ghost buddy was her way of coping. She wasn't hurting anyone, so what did it matter anyway? I was a total skeptic, to say the least, of all of this at first. I liked the idea of communicating with the other side, but I thought ghosts were just for storybooks, Hollywood movies, and All Hallows' Eve. I soon learned, though, that this was not an accurate view of the world around me. She told me during the Witches' Circle that they had discovered his name was HP, and that he had died when he was 8 years old. He quickly made me a believer, and over time, I fell in love with this little guy. In retrospect, I know that he protected us from the worst of what came from the woods. Early on, he was blamed for what was happening, but that didn't last long. I also want to point out another important feature to this house. The hallway, which led to the bedrooms, was really standard. There were 2 doors off each side of it, leading to 3 of the 4 bedrooms and 1 of the bathrooms. At the very end of the hall, directly opposite the doorway, was the door to the back bedroom. No one ever wanted to go in there. It had multiple windows and was arguably the brightest room in the entire house, but it always felt cold, dark, and heavy, gloomy. I only have one way to describe it, in fact, and it probably won't make sense, but it felt like it visually smelled bad. Like your eyes could sense something gross and awful that you just couldn't see. Something bitter or angry. During the months that followed, the activity in the house began to build. All of the stereotypical occurrences you hear in every scary story. But there is just something about being in it, while it's happening, that is. Loud, heavy footsteps coming down the hall when no one is home and no one is there. Lights going on and off for no electrical reason. Items would go missing and turn up in the most unexpected or simply impossible places. And it started to create tension in the house. We tried so hard to find explanations for everything, but there were times where we just couldn't find a logical or scientific reason for what happened. It was driving Kellen crazy. Mary and I were super stoked about all this. We thought it was awesome. But Kellen didn't believe us. Even when something happened to her, she would never admit that she was put off by whatever it was that had happened, insisting that there was a logical explanation for all of it, even when she couldn't find one. We were sitting in the living room one night, and Mary asked for anyone who was there to let us know that they were present. The temperature in the room dipped immediately, goosebumps everywhere. and then a loud, clear 3 knocks coming from the hallway. She gets up to check, and there's no one there. She goes down the hall into the master, and Kellen is sound asleep in the bed. She also said that she felt as if someone walked behind her, step by step, on her way back down the dark hallway and into the living room. We did this several more times too, and we got several more responses from the knocking, each time from a different wall on our end of the house. It continued building too, this feeling in the house, that is. No one ever really felt like they were alone anymore. It got to the point, in fact, where something weird was happening every single day. The friends that were over most frequently all had their own experiences too. People who were visiting or hanging out for the first time saw and heard and felt things. Some people literally wouldn't come back too. Sometimes our invisible friends startled or unsettled people so badly that we literally never saw them again. They just would never come back or talk to us. Of course, Mary and I were egging it on at every chance that we had. At the time, we thought it was a riot. Meanwhile, Kellen still denied everything. She starts to blame us for playing tricks on everyone and stirring all this up too. She accused us of fabricating stories, exaggerating and feeding off of each other. It was the beginning of October when everything really escalated. My birthday is October 7th, and I wanted a low-key event for the party. Bonfires are my favorite, so it was decided pretty quickly. A good dinner, a few close friends, and a roaring fire would be great. Paradise, in fact. We had fires all the time. I mean, 55, albeit creeptastic acres of free firewood. Yes, please, and thank you, right? So, it was late. Everyone was gone and Kellen was passed out. Since the party had eventually moved inside the house, Mary and I got up to go out and extinguish the now languishing fire. We walked down through the yard, and about halfway down to the fire pit, I stopped and turned back against the wind to light a cigarette. That takes, maybe 10 seconds if you suck at it. I turn back and Mary has made it to the fire, and my heart stops in my chest. I felt as though someone poured a bucket of ice water over my head. All of a sudden, I realized that she's not alone at the fire. There's a man there. A tall man. A bronze skin. Long dark hair. But it was his face that still gets to me at night. His eyes were so dark that I couldn't see any white. But his mouth? That's what's etched into my mind forever. Red, like blood red, all over his mouth, all down his chin. It looked like he had simply bitten into a live mammal and just devoured what he could. There was also malice on his face, and every hair on my body stood on end. I've read so many people describe what it was like for them to experience going into fight or flight mode. It's almost as if they recall a switch turning, and they follow that impulse to survive or escape. I didn't feel that. All I remember was the next thing I knew, I was sitting on the couch, shaking. I couldn't warm myself enough. It was just so cold. Too cold. My guts felt like glaciers. I had no idea what the hell that was, but I just knew that it wasn't right. Before I could even begin to fully mentally process the situation, Mary comes stomping back into the house, pissed. I had totally bailed on her without so much as a word. I bounced and just left her out there alone. Some friend I was that night, right? She turned the corner into the living room, already starting to give me a piece of her mind when she saw my face. I hadn't felt the color drained from it, but she hurried over to me, asking what was wrong. She said that I was so pale that I looked almost dead. Without hesitation, I told her what happened. Because she saw my face and looked into my eyes, she knew that I wasn't faking that kind of reaction, so she never doubted me. It left me really deeply unsettled for a long time. No one had seen anything up to that point. The doors open, yes. A cup slides a couple of inches across the table, yeah. A movement out of your peripheral vision, absolutely. Orbs every day. But not an apparition like that. Especially not a strong, vivid one anyway. He wasn't transparent. He wasn't smoke. He wasn't a shadow. And he definitely wasn't in my mind. I don't think I could even conjure an image like that. It was just so terrifying. His face was gore and a passionate expression of hatred. This completely shattered my perspective of the world around me too. Up to that point, I had never experienced anything even remotely close to that level of fear, and I've lived through some pretty fucked up situations. It scared Mary too because she had been there herself and she hadn't seen or heard anyone, even though he was a few feet away from her. It was around that time that people started to see the lumberjack, as they called it. And the thing that gets me about this guy is he was reported by people who didn't know each other. We had a huge social network. We were a house of artists and performers, and we knew everybody, and then some. And when I say this, what I mean is that these people hadn't even crossed paths. And this was before we had to start warning new people when they came to the house. We weren't talking about what was happening with just anyone at the time. And this guy was 7 feet tall, burly, stocky, a massive man. And I suppose to be expected, he was always carrying an axe. Lovely, right? And we believed them because why on earth would anyone make up something like that? They always saw him either in or just on the edge of the woods too, and they were always freaked out afterwards. Until finally, a house regular saw him for the first time. She was chilling in the living room when she looked up and saw him staring straight back at her through one of the windows on the end of the house. Apparently, saw him clear as day, looking fully into the window. It freaked her out, and she was probably the most unshakable of all of us. But my favorite part to this story is that he was looking in the windows on the end of the house. Those windows were really small, and from the outside of the house, they were well over 7 feet off the ground. Furthermore, there were these thick bushes along that side of the house, so no one could have placed something on the ground and stood on it to look in without us hearing them at least, especially since the windows were open at the time. That was when she told us that she had seen him once before outside, but had kept it to herself too. This friend was actually living behind the house at the time. She was a total hippie, just a really wonderful person too. She had purchased an honest-to-God legit teepee from someone and constructed it on the edge of the woods in the backyard. It had a freaking wood-burning stove and everything. Well, obviously, that didn't last long. It's Catawba land, and she was all for the humble return to basics living experience, but not for the loss of sleep. Every night, she would wake up to the sounds of something big and heavy stalking around the teepee. She thought that it was an animal at first, but never saw any evidence of one. No prints in the soil, nothing. She would lay there frozen with fear while it paced around in a very predatory way. Eventually, she was forced to vacate the teepee and move into one of the spare bedrooms. We had all lived in bad neighborhoods at some time in our lives, so closing and locking the doors at night before bed is a habit for all of us. Kellen, though, got a shock to her system one morning a few weeks after my birthday. As she got up, walked down the hallway, and when she got to the end, she looked up to see the front door, obviously unlocked, and standing wide open to her left. Even worse though, to her right, the back door was in the same state. She felt a chill run down her spine when she walked to close the back door, and she realized that the side door at the edge of the kitchen was also open. No one ever used that door. There was typically laundry piled in front of it, in fact. Well, she was beside herself. She woke Mary up out of a dead sleep, only to be assured that all of the hatches had been battened down before she had gone to bed. And why the hell would she even have a reason to touch the side door? One night, not long after everyone had gone to bed and I was by myself in the living room playing Mario Kart, I heard the cabinet doors opening and shutting in the kitchen. Initially, I paid it no mind, as two of the cats would go in and out of the bottom cabinets all the time. I thought that they were playing, and I just kept it going. They were opening and shutting, and then there was a huge bang. I nearly jumped out of my skin as the cabinet slammed shut. It felt like an ice cube ran down the back of my neck. How did the cat shut the door that hard? It didn't make any sense to me. I put the controller down so that I could go see what they were up to when I noticed that they were right there, passed out on the other couch, like twitching while dreaming passed out. I immediately shuddered. It creeped me completely out. I stood up to walk to the kitchen. Mind you, the doors are still going at this point. I make the 6 or 7 steps it takes to get around the corner, a flip on the light, and nothing. Everything was as it should be. Not a single article out of place. I march across the room, feeling like someone is standing just outside the doors, staring at me. I can feel their eyes burning a hole right through me, and the cabinets are empty. Nothing. No one. On edge, I went back to the living room and made myself fall asleep. Shit was starting to get real, as they say. People were being touched when alone. The shower was the worst place for this too. That never quite failed to ruin your peace of mind. Everyone was on edge. The stress from the constant barrage of inexplicable events was causing problems in Mary and Kellen's relationship too, as well as everyone's friendships. Tempers were flaring, and we were now hearing the occasional disembodied voice on top of everything else. We tried and failed numerous times to debunk these occurrences, only to end up feeling paranoid and unsettled. Mary, unfortunately, got the worst of this, including while she was terribly sick and stuck in bed. Kellen was at work and everyone was out of the house. She was fast asleep in bed when she was ripped back to consciousness by a woman walking up and down the hallway crying. But crying apparently wasn't the right word. She described it as a completely devastating, grief-stricken howl. The wails of a loving mother who had just witnessed her beloved child gunned down right in front of her or something. It chilled her to the core. She assumed that something awful had happened and got up to see who was hysterically sobbing and why. As soon as she lifted her body up from the bed, the crying just stopped. It didn't dissipate. It just was gone, and the silence was ringing, oppressive in fact. She struggled out of bed and opened the bedroom door, and obviously there was no one. As she walked down the hallway, opening each door in turn as she went, no one was home. No electrics were on. The windows were closed. There was no one in the yard. She felt the dread mounting as she checked the whole house, only to find that there was no one home but herself, and all of the doors were locked from the inside. She went back to her room, feeling really on edge. Exhausted, she laid back down in the bed, and the wails started back up immediately. Full volume, full intensity, as though it had never stopped. Every time she would lift herself up off the bed, it would quit too. All she wanted to do was sleep. She felt terrible, and this was making it so much worse. She tried calling out to soothe or comfort, but it was to no avail. And eventually, she finally just fell asleep from exhaustion. So, at this point, I shouldn't have to tell you that no one felt safe anymore. No one was comfortable. Even with multiple people home, there was no escape from it all. You just never felt at peace. You never felt alone. You always felt watched. It was abrasive. There was only strength in massive numbers at that point. Our parties were legend around here, and we held them regularly for this fact. Only then could we really let go. That many people in and around the house certainly didn't do anything to stop the paranormal occurrences, but with so much activity going on, it masked it well. We would discuss it openly with people now. They were made well aware that they were partying in a legit haunted house. There was also no shortage of people with their own stories to tell or witness to an event. Often, someone would make the mistake of calling bullshit or proclaiming very vehemently that they were an atheist or some such and didn't believe in our nonsense. Every single time someone did this, they were almost immediately targeted too. That was always a good laugh at their expense, but several of these people were frightened so badly that they just never came back. A couple of them would never even speak to us again. In fact, it got so bad that I all but insisted people sign a waiver so I make no apologies for them getting bitten on the ass when they say things like that. The worst of these, though, was Taylor, the poor thing. Her girlfriend, Jessie, had been spending time with us and we all became friends. As was customary with new friends, Kellen invited them out to have dinner and chill out for a while. I was hanging out with them when it was time to head to the house for dinner. Jessie was telling Taylor about the creepy things that went on, and I delivered my warning as usual. Well, she tried to shut me down, and I let her. I wasn't going to waste my breath. I do remember specifically telling her, though, in no uncertain words, that she should not rebuke anything that she can't see. She scoffed at me like I was a mental patient on meds or something. Suit yourself, girl. We got there and settled in while Kellen cooked. I was going back and forth, entertaining the guests and also aiding in the kitchen. I vividly recall seeing a stack of dishes on the counter beside the sink that were perched too close to the edge for my comfort, so I went to them and slid them all the way back to the wall, deciding to wash them as soon as everyone was done eating. In the living room, the conversation had turned to the activity in the house. Mary and Jessie were telling tales and Taylor was having none of it. I heard her as clear as a bell from my spot in the kitchen say that it was all bullshit, and that she didn't believe any of us because none of it was real. I swear that I could hear my own eyes rolling in my head as Kellen huffed a chuckle. I swear that I could hear my own eyes rolling in my head as Kellen huffed a chuckle. Well, shit, I thought. It's only a matter of time now. And sure enough, as Kellen started to plate the food, she called to the girls in the other room to come and get their dinner. I was standing with my back to the French doors with the sink to my right. Kellen was standing at the stove as Jessie and Taylor walked around the corner, followed by Mary. I watched as they came to a sudden and complete halt in the kitchen doorway. Jessie's mouth dropped open, and Taylor's eyes went as wide as dinner plates. The colour drained from their faces, and my hackles went straight up. Before I could move an inch, the room was just torn asunder. 3 things happened simultaneously, in fact. It took a little while to piece it all together afterwards, but as the girls rounded the corner in the kitchen, they watched one of the upper cabinet doors open on its own. I was across the room and Kellen had her back to it, and that was why they stopped. I hadn't realized the door behind me had opened. 5 minutes before this, I had taken a bag of trash out and know for a fact that I closed and locked that door upon re-entry. It's habitual at this point. At the same time this happened, the 2 doors slammed shut with force, and it shook the entire end of the house, and the stack of plates shot off the counter, hit the wall beside the stove and fell into pieces to the floor. And no, naysayers, the plates did not just fall off the counter because of the door slamming. I would love to have the laws of physics explain this, but I saw them hit the wall with force. Even Kellen couldn't explain that one away. And this, we soon discovered, was her breaking point. So, Kellen contacted a team of paranormal investigators. She told them a little bit about what had happened going on and asked for help. None of us at this point knew what to do. It was out of control, and what was happening wasn't okay anymore. At this point in my life, I had learned how to cleanse and protect houses and living spaces better than anyone that I knew. I have an entire set of shelves in my room with all the tools of the metaphysical trade, if that's what you call it. If it happened today, it wouldn't be a problem, but at the time, we were completely clueless. This seemed like the only answer to us at the time, and so they came around. It was a group of them. I don't remember how many exactly, 6 or even 7 maybe. After they arrived, we were all standing in the backyard just inside the edge of the tree line. We were telling them in more detail about some of our encounters, and the sun was quickly setting. They didn't really act like they believed us about the level of frequency or the activity. They admitted that they weren't really interested in the house. One of the women, I'll call her Debbie, had recently hurt her foot and could not venture into the woods with the others, so she would be the only one to come in the house with me. She would comb through all of our orb files, while the others investigated the property. This whole thing was a bit disappointing. I felt like they didn't believe us and weren't going to help. Although there was no shortage of crazy things happening in the woods, our concerns were what was now disrupting day-to-day life within the building. Debbie was explaining that what made them so good at what they do is that they're all natural skeptics. She told us that she balanced the group further by being a total skeptic in every situation, no matter what. It took serious evidence to convince her. My heart was sinking. I grew more disappointed the more she spoke, in fact. I was starting to think that we wouldn't be able to convince them that this was real, and therefore they weren't going to help us fix this mess. But I had foolishly forgotten a very important fact. No sooner had she finished explaining her position in the group, she felt a tug to her hair. Her hand shot up and she whipped her head around. She admitted to thinking her hair had gotten caught on something, but when she turned around, there was nothing there, and no one standing behind her. She was completely stunned for a second at what had happened. This made a smile break across my face, and my heart light up again. "We told you they react when you claim not to believe," I said, and we all laughed, the tension now broken. She came with us while the others did their thing in the woods. Ironically enough, not a damn thing happened in that house while she was with us, though. It was like having a bunch of bad kids that were determined to be on their best behavior while there was a ghost hunter around. It turns out, though, that didn't matter. She was glued to those pictures, sometimes turning the laptop this way or that to get a better look. She copied some of the files into a separate folder, and when she was done, it was these that she brought to our attention. She pointed out numerous orbs which seemed to contain a face in each one. I mean, seriously, very obvious faces that once you look closely enough were evident. There was one in particular that stood out to her too. It was clearly a man's face. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, sometimes open as if in speech, and most interestingly, a distinct handlebar moustache. This same face appeared in a good number of pictures too. The amazing thing was, This guy showed up in pictures from several different locations, taken at different times, on different days by different cameras, operated by different people. That made my blood run cold, but I was just really pumped at the time to figure this all out. She complimented us on our documentation of the events and was pleased to have gotten the chance to go through these pictures. I think it really made her happy that she had found something that we hadn't, and been able to give this piece of the puzzle to us. Her colleagues finished outside, and it was time for them to leave now. They hadn't experienced as much as I had expected them to, but they had encountered enough to make them believers in our situation, that was for sure. So, time passed on, and the girls, eventually they broke up. Mary moved out and away, and my friendship with Kellen didn't really survive the breakup, and I stopped spending time at that house. Eventually, though, we worked through some of the problems and spent some time out there. Nothing was as bad as it had been, although it never truly stopped. And this was part of why her new girlfriend wanted a place of their own. She didn't want any ghosts of Kellen's previous relationships, or literal ghosts for that matter. I went out to see them on their last day. Everything was pretty much out of the house. I went to help grab the very last of their stuff to take it to the new house with them. It was actually a happy occasion, and I was pretty glad to see Kellen doing so well with moving forward. When we got to the new place, though, Kellen was almost too excited to tell me something. She was practically bursting at the seams, in fact. As they were preparing to move, she decided to talk to some neighbors down the street. She saw them out in the yard and just approached them. Somehow, the conversation got around to the previous owner, the one before Kellen's landlord. And this still freaks me out to this day. The neighbors were telling her about the old man who had lived in that house, basically forever. It turns out that he actually died in the house. Yeah, that's right. And, even better, he had died in the very back bedroom, the room no one could stand to be in. Now, this last part is where my wheels fell off. This guy was known all over the reservation for his handlebar mustache. I know that it's so cliche to say this, but it truly just gives me chills to write this out. A handlebar mustache? Seriously? The one thing that had caught the investigator's eye in the damn orbs? Chills to this day, over 10 years later, I tell you. So, let me finish with this. For those naysayers out there who listen to this and don't believe, remember that until this happened, I was just like you. You better hope and pray that you don't end up like us. It's very easy to call something untrue when you're listening to a YouTube narrator. It's an entirely different animal to live it day in and day out, I'll tell you that much. This is also not the only haunted house I've lived in. It took me years to wise up and learn how to protect myself and my home. And if anyone is interested in those stories, I'd be happy to share them too and post them here. Anyway, thanks again to everyone who stayed until the end and listened. I appreciate your ability to have an open mind. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Have you guys had any similar experiences? And if you did, how did you react to it?